I'm Shireen Bhan, and we're going to be talking about one of the most ambitious tax reforms that India is likely to see, that is the goods and services tax. What is the GST going to mean for industry? What is it going to mean for the consumer? What will it mean in the short term? Will we see disruption and pain in the short term? And what are the long-term advantages? With us, Amit Bhagat of PwC, Rajeev Dimri of BMR Advisors, and Prateek Jain. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the GST Classroom. Let me start by asking you, because these are questions that are coming in from our audience at this point in time. And the number one question that everybody is asking is, what is the big advantage of the goods and services tax? We've heard industry talk about how this is going to enhance India's GDP by between 1 and 2%. We've heard the government talk about how this is going to improve compliance, make tax administration simpler, and so on and so forth. But for the viewer, for the consumer who's watching this show, what is the advantage of the goods and services tax? How is it going to change my life? Let's start with you.
Okay, before we get on to what is GST, let's first understand what is the bane of the current indirect tax regime. So if you could divide it into, let's say, 3 buckets. One is the multiplicity of taxes, which means that there's a tax at the central level, tax at the state level, and even at the central and the state level, there are various types of taxes and various authorities to deal with. So which means there's a multiplicity in terms of compliances as well. So these lead to, and of course, there's no fungibility, or to simplify it, one tax paid on the procurement side, let's say VAT paid on the procurement side, cannot be offset against a service tax or an excise.
Sure.
So, which causes a cascading. Cascading would mean that these costs then get embedded in the product cost or the service cost. So, the issue is, how do we get rid of these problems, which ultimately increases the product cost and affects the consumer. So these are the problems which leads to a need for a solution. GST hopefully is that solution, where all these various taxes at the central level and the state level will be rolled into one single national tax in line with the one tax, one national market concept, which will reduce all these complexities, all these disputes among which authority should tax which transaction. So broadly, this is what it leads to, this GST, in terms of a solution to all the ills that we have in the current regime.
It's a solution to a lot of the tax woes that we face. Prateek Jain, how will it impact the end consumer? You know, we've got this problem of actually taxing something over and over again. Is it going to make my life simpler when I go to buy something from the market, is what consumers are asking. Am I going to be able to buy something cheaper once GST comes into effect?
I think you would. So just to take from where Amit left, I think GST, we are looking at simple, transparent and more stable tax system. So from a consumer standpoint, today when you go and buy, you have to make a choice whether you buy from state A or state B, because the rate of VAT, let's say on mobile phones, could be different from Delhi and Haryana. So therefore, as a consumer, I'm not sure where should I buy from. When I go and buy something, I'm not sure on the invoice how much tax do I pay, because excise duty has already been paid earlier. It's not reflected on the invoice. So I don't know, right? So it's a much more transparent system. It should definitely reduce the prices, at least for the large segment of manufactured goods. Because manufacturing costs will come down, because a lot of taxes that the manufacturer pays in terms of central sales tax and entry tax and so on and so forth will not be there. So that all should all get reflected into the lower prices. And all of these surcharges and cesses and many of those will go away. So it's a simple tax system as well. So as a consumer, I'm happy because prices have come down. And I'm also happy because I know what I'm paying and what's going to the country.
Rajeev, that's the advantage as far as the consumer is concerned. Let's talk about the big advantage for the government as well, because with the movement towards the GST, the hope is that the government's tax revenues will increase significantly, and that in fact will be a better path towards fiscal consolidation and achieve the goal of fiscal consolidation, as opposed to cutting back on expenditure. Of course, wasteful expenditure needs to be cut down, but this will be the path towards fiscal consolidation because it will enhance the government's tax revenues. We've heard the consumer argument. What will the GST mean for the government?
Many dimensions to it. A much better system to administer, because part of the benefit of the GST is it's a self-policing. If you and I are transacting, I would want you to charge me the invoice, account for all taxes. So part of the work that today government does in anti-evasion, finding people, part of that work will get done by the system.
So tax evasion will come down?
Will come down. I mean, there is no zero tax evasion regime, but yes, it will come down because the economic incentive of today avoidance will come down. More people would like to be in the system, so it's a self-inviting, self-policing system. But at a macro level, if you're taking something which is not working and is inefficient, with introducing something which is more efficient, and the world has shown us that it is more efficient, those benefits will flow to the consumer, and those benefits will flow to the government. Today, if the government has to raise revenues, it has to make choices. Do I raise this tax? Do I raise that tax? And therefore, some of those choices start creating diversions in the economy. In a GST environment, if I change a rate today, I hopefully will start seeing more revenue tomorrow. If I reduce a rate tomorrow, then the response time is much quicker.
Okay.
So from a government perspective, if I consolidate the market, make it efficient, reduce the diversions, goods versus services, state A versus state B, remove all these artificialities that have crept into our system. If it's a self-policing system, it responds better to my policies. What more would I want as a government from a tax system?
Absolutely. And what will this then mean? Because we've just discussed what it means to the consumer, and hopefully because you will actually see prices come down and make it simpler and easier, what will it mean in terms of consumption? Will we see a significant pickup in terms of consumption with the advent of the GST?
Well, logically speaking, yes. If one assumes that the prices would come down, there's more efficiency in the production factors, which ultimately leads to lower costs.
Yeah.
And also, it increases consumers' ability to, increases the disposable income in a way. And that would lead to a higher consumption.
Pratik, what will this mean then in terms of India's competitiveness as well? Especially when we talk about India being an export hub, this Make in India manufacturing dream that the government is holding out. How will the GST help realize that ambition and that aspiration? 2-3
points. One is, I think it will significantly improve the investors' confidence, because if you look at India's ranking in ease of doing business, it's very, very low. And therefore, if you have a simple tax system, the confidence increases. Okay, your exports will become more competitive, because today when you export your products, you also export the taxes along with that. And when India is compared with China, that is a striking difference what you have in India and China, because when China goods are exported, they don't export taxes. In fact, in many cases they get subsidies, right? So that is also very important. Third, which is perhaps the most important point, is that GST will hugely favor manufacturing in India. So when we talk about Make in India, it has to be there, because today it is so complex environment to deal with. What are the goods and services for which I'll get credits, and my supply chain.
And even the interstate movement of goods.
Absolutely. So in supply chain, because I want to avoid central sales tax, I have multiple warehouses. And there are estimates to say that more than $100 billion it gets lost in the supply chain inefficiency. So it's hugely positive for manufacturing. And therefore, I would say that for Make in India initiative, this is the single most important thing in the agenda of the government today.
Rajeev Dimri, would you agree that for the Make in India objective, the GST, the advent of the GST is going to be the big game changer?
Yes, it's a huge game changer. And GST is being talked about before we had a focus on Make in India, and I agree with the points that today we have subjected our manufacturing environment to so many inefficiencies and difficulties that just unbundling their potential is what is the need. Yes, it is a single biggest change that can happen for Make in India campaign. We have 1/4 of our GDP contributing 3/4 of our revenue, so it's a hugely taxed sector, and that burden needs to go away. And the only possibility of unburdening the manufacturing is through GST.
Okay. We've got a viewer question coming in, and this comes into us from I'm Style Guru. I hope I've got that right. He says, will GST address the issue of inequality of rate of value-added tax on a product levied by state governments? Rajeev?
Yes, it would. Although there is, little tweak, because states are allowed to have a different rate, so within a band. So it's not that we will have a single rate across the country. Some minor deviations are possible, but the band of the deviation should narrow down. That's my hope. That's my belief.
Pratik?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not an ideal GST in that sense, but we still have those variations. one would hope that industry would raise its voice so that that band is narrower and hopefully in a year or so it goes away. Because if you have different tax rates in different states, then the common market that we want to create is diluted to some extent. But if I have a choice to either have GST with multiple rates or don't have GST at all, I would rather go with multiple rates to start with.
So go with an imperfect GST as opposed to at least postponing the GST indefinite. Pratik, let me ask you this. Viewers writing in saying, what is the need for a constitution amendment? If you can take us through what the constitution amendment changes as part of that amendment are being proposed and why the need for this.
Yeah, so you see, the basic thing which you need to understand is that our constitution starts with saying that India is a union of states. So states were always sovereign in their own tax system. So today the power of taxation is divided between the central government, which is customs, excise and service tax, and to the state governments, which is VAT on sale of products and luxury tax and entry tax. The way GST will happen is, other than custom duty, everything will fold into GST.
Right.
And every transaction would have two tax. Central GST and state GST. And when you have to give that power, so therefore the states will need to get power to have tax on services, and central government will have to have powers to tax sale of products, right? So if you have to do that, you have to amend the constitution. The other important thing is that you also want uniformity once GST comes in. So you have to have a framework or a body which decides that how GST will shape. And that is what is being achieved through GST Council, where all the state finance ministers will be there. And third is to have import GST. Today, as per the constitution, the states cannot impose tax on imports. So therefore, import GST has to come in. So broadly, to divide the power between center and state and to have that some kind of uniformity, and also to decide that how the exceptions would be carved out from GST as and when required. You need to have a constitutional framework.
Okay, so that's as far as the constitution amendments are concerned. And Rajeev, let me ask you this, because again, a lot of viewers asking that, what is the politics about GST? Why do we have some states saying that no, we can't go ahead, and the Congress blamed Mr. Modi when he was the Chief Minister of Gujarat for derailing this? But there are legitimate concerns that state governments have as far as the revenue loss is concerned. The government has proposed a compensation structure as well. Share with us the concerns that state governments will have to keep in mind, what the government is actually proposing in terms of the compensation structure, and how you see this proceeding forward.
As you know, states are sovereign in many functions. States have responsibilities, whether it's the responsibility of police, health, education. So states have their own expenses, states have their own obligations, and the only real source of income that they have is their ability to tax. In the last 30, 40, 50 years, states have tried to work on policies that enhance the revenue base. So states have tried to attract investment into the state, manufacturing, so on and so forth. And therefore, they have tried to create bricks around, building blocks around revenue. We are talking about changing everything. Because we have currently worked on a system where I produce in one state and sell all across India, I pay taxes in the state in which I produce. The system is going to change where the tax is going to go to consumption. So let's take a state like Delhi, which is not a much producing state, but it is a large consuming state. Somewhere, state like Delhi will benefit. If there are large producing states and low consuming states, they might end up losing some taxable base. So yes, it is, in some cases, there is politics, possibly, but in some cases, there are some legitimate concerns. Delhi may work with the...
Delhi clearly is going to be a beneficiary as far as the GST is concerned, and that is what the Aam Aadmi Party is betting on as well. Let's talk about what's been left out of the GST and the functioning of the GST Council. If you can throw some light on the functioning of the GST Council, and for now, what's been left out of the GST?
So what is left out essentially are three large things. One is alcohol, which is left out, which will still be subject to state excise duty and VAT. And the reasons are obvious. It's a highly politically sensitive product, and also
and a big revenue generator.
Big revenue generator. So therefore, that is kept out. I don't think that will have a huge impact on the economy per se. The other thing which has been left out is petroleum products. And when I say petroleum products, I'm including petrol, diesel, natural gas, ATF, and everything. And that, although that has been left to the GST Council, GST Council can decide when GST will be imposed. So it's not been left out forever. Hopefully, in next couple of years, GST Council will have enough sort of data to say that it should be covered. But effectively, 1/3 of your economy is outside, because petroleum products constitute roughly 1/3 of the total tax collection of the government. And third is electricity. Power generation or electricity would be kept out. Electricity duties will continue. It will not be subject to GST. So these are the three things which have been kind of left out. Coming to the GST Council, of course, GST Council will comprise of all the state finance ministers, with Union Finance Minister as the chairperson. And any decision which has to be taken will be taken by majority, 2/3 majority of the GST Council.
We've got more questions coming in. So, Pratik, let me ask you this. Question asking us, will the GST impact inflation?
Yes, it does. So I mean, logically what we're saying is that most of the manufactured commodities in India, the prices should come down. But what happens is that in the initial few months or a year or so, the industry may not be able to assess the real impact of GST. And therefore, the tendency, therefore, is not to pass on the benefit to the consumers immediately.
Okay.
And this is what has happened internationally. In a short run, very often, GST is known to be inflationary. Okay. So I'm also expecting some sort of inflationary trend in the initial few months.
Significant or?
I think, the prices, the commodities might see an increase, let's say by 4%, 5%, 7% in many cases, to my mind. But very quickly, I think you may start seeing it stabilizing.
Okay.
And that also is a process of, how do you start educating yourself to see that what is the real impact of GST. Start assessing it now, so that on day one, you can take your pricing decisions. But we're not living in an ideal sort of world. So I think initial 6 months, I expect it to be inflationary, and then after that, it may stabilize. Some action.
Okay, let's talk about some of the other questions that have come in. And Rajeev, let me ask you this. What change will GST bring to small businesses? As right now, they don't pay any excise duty till about 1.5 crore rupees. This limit may go down after the GST comes in.
So the limits work in an environment which is a single point tax. So these limits that we talk about are in the context of excise law. Excise law only applies at one point, which is the point of manufacture.
Yeah.
Once that point has not been taxed, all subsequent sales will not have excise. GST, which is a multi-point tax system, quite like VAT, any exemption at one point actually doesn't follow through. And therefore, even if I would have raised that limit to 2 crores, if I am dealing with goods that have multi-tier distribution centers, aspect, that exemption does not follow through, and therefore that has to go down. So whether it is limit-based exemption, area-based exemptions, entity-based exemptions, they don't work. They're not compatible in a GST environment.
So exemptions are out of the window?
Unless it's a product exemption.
Okay.
So if it's a limit-based or area-based, I go to Uttaranchal, Himachal, those exemptions are incompatible with the system. Some other mechanism will have to come. So yes, it is going to impact different people differently. When we say it is efficient for the whole economy, but that doesn't mean that every player will find it to its advantage. There are those people at the fringes who might find it difficult, particularly direct B2C segment. In a B2B segment, it can only mean good rather than not good.
As we've been discussing, it is going to improve compliance, it is going to make it simpler, it's going to make the entire tax process a lot simpler, and it is going to benefit the consumer, you and me, in the long term. But there are going to be periods of pain in the short term that we are going to have to deal with. It's not all clear. We don't have clarity on many crucial issues. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the GST Classroom. Thank you very much for your time. On that note, it's time for us to wrap up this show. Goodbye. Many thanks for watching.